Welcome to Godless and Grounded. Imagine being told all your life that what really matters is not the years you spend on this earth, but what supposedly happens after you die. Billions of people live and die with this idea shaping their choices, their morals, their politics, and even their fears. Religions across the world promise different versions of what comes after death, but when we actually stop and look closely, a lot of those claims start to sound less like eternal truths and more like absurd fairy tales invented to control or comfort people. Today, we are going to walk through 10 of the most absurd religious claims about the afterlife and explore why they do not hold up when you apply reason, evidence, or even a bit of common sense. Let's start with one of the most well-known ideas. The claim that after death, you will face a courtroom in the sky where every single action of your life is weighed. This idea shows up in many religions. Christianity has Judgment Day. Islam has the weighing of deeds. Hinduism talks about karma deciding your next rebirth, and so on. The problem with this is simple. Think about the sheer impossibility of keeping track of every tiny action, thought, or word from every human being who has ever lived. We are talking about over 100 billion humans who have existed in history. Imagine a cosmic hard drive storing every detail of every moment of your life, down to the time you borrowed your neighbor's pen and forgot to return it. The absurdity is not only in the logistics but in the morality. If life is one giant exam where even mistakes you never meant to commit are written down forever, then free will becomes meaningless. It is like living under constant surveillance where forgiveness is conditional and based on following rules that you never agreed to in the first place. Another claim that stands out is the idea of eternal punishment for finite mistakes. Many religions preach the existence of hell, a place of torture without end. Christianity describes fire and brimstone. Islam has descriptions of boiling water poured over heads and skins being replaced so they can burn again. And even Buddhism has its own terrifying hell realms. Think about how bizarre this is. A human life, no matter how long, is still temporary. The worst crime imaginable is still committed in finite time. Yet religions claim that punishment for such acts will last forever. This is like sentencing a thief who stole an apple to an eternity of electrocution. It is not justice. It is not moral. It is sadistic. And yet millions of people are taught to believe this is fair. In fact, many people accept it without realizing that it contradicts even our most basic human sense of fairness. On the opposite side, heaven is sold as a paradise for those who obey. But the absurdity of heaven is in how childish and culturally biased its descriptions are. In Christianity, heaven is streets of gold and eternal worship. In Islam, it is rivers of milk and honey and a supply of virgins for men. In Hinduism, it is merging into a blissful cosmic consciousness. The problem is that each culture's heaven looks suspiciously like the wishes of people living in that time and place. Desert cultures imagined water and gardens because those were luxuries. Societies where men dominated women described rewards in terms of sexual access to women. Gold and jewels were seen as treasures, so they decorated their heaven with it. But if heaven is eternal, then what happens after the novelty wears off? Imagine singing hymns for millions of years without a break, or drinking milk and honey for centuries. At some point, eternity turns into torture disguised as pleasure. Even psychologists today know that too much pleasure without variety leads to boredom, depression, and even insanity. So when religions promise eternal happiness, what they are really describing is an eternal prison of monotony. One of the strangest claims is reincarnation, the belief that after death you come back as another human or even as an animal depending on your past deeds. At first, it may sound poetic like a cosmic recycling program, but when you think carefully, it falls apart. If souls are constantly being reborn, where do the extra souls come from to match our exploding human population? 2,000 years ago, there were only about 200 million humans. Today, we have over 8 billion. Are we supposed to believe billions of new souls suddenly appeared? Or are mosquitoes and cows being downgraded into humans to keep the numbers balanced? Reincarnation also makes justice look pointless. If you suffer in this life because of something you did in a previous life that you cannot even remember, then how is that fair? It is like being punished for a crime you cannot recall in a courtroom where you are not even told what the crime was. Another absurd claim is that only followers of one specific religion get the reward of heaven, while everyone else suffers. Christianity, Islam, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, and many others each claim to be the only true path. Imagine the arrogance of billions of people thinking that their small tribe or sect alone has the correct map to eternity. This creates not only logical absurdity, but also moral cruelty. What kind of God would create humans with different cultures, languages, and beliefs, and then condemn most of them for being born in the wrong place? Think about a child born in a remote village in Japan in the year 800 AD. They never heard of Christianity or Islam. According to strict interpretations, that child is doomed simply because they were unlucky in geography and time. If a God designed the world this way, it is not justice. It is a cosmic lottery where almost everyone loses. Let us look at another strange belief, that the afterlife rewards people based on rituals instead of morality. In some religions, it is not about being kind or just. Instead, it is about whether you perform the right prayer at the right time, faced the correct direction, or followed purity laws about food and clothing. Imagine a serial killer who repents and performs a ritual correctly being welcomed into heaven, while a kind and selfless atheist who spent their life helping others burns in hell simply because they doubted. That flips morality upside down. It reduces life to superstition where the rules matter more than the substance. Real justice should be about actions and intentions, not magical rituals that look more like a checklist than a moral compass. Another ridiculous idea is that dead bodies will be resurrected at the end of time. Both Christianity and Islam talk about graves opening and people rising again, some with glorified bodies. But when you think scientifically, this is impossible. Most people's bodies are not intact after centuries. They decompose, are eaten by animals, or burned in cremation. Some atoms from one body end up in plants, which are eaten by other people, meaning parts of one person are recycled into another. Whose body gets those atoms on Resurrection Day? The logistics make no sense. Beyond that, what would be the point of giving us bodies again if heaven and hell are supposed to be eternal spiritual realms? It shows how the writers of these religious stories could not imagine an existence beyond physical flesh, so they simply extended human bodies into eternity, forgetting that biology does not cooperate with fantasy. Then there is the claim that in heaven you will reunite with your loved ones. On the surface, this sounds comforting, but if you really think about it, the contradictions pile up. What if one of your loved ones did not make it to heaven but ended up in hell? Are you supposed to enjoy paradise while knowing they are being tortured forever? Or are your memories erased so you forget them? In that case, are you really still you if parts of your mind and heart are deleted? And if you do reunite, which version of them will you meet? Your grandmother at age 90 or her younger self? What if your spouse had multiple marriages? Which partner do they reunite with? The idea crumbles under basic human questions. It is like someone wrote a wish fulfillment story without thinking through the details. We also hear the bizarre claim that heaven and hell are necessary for morality. Without the carrot of paradise and the stick of eternal punishment, people would supposedly run wild. But this is insulting to human beings. It suggests that the only reason we should be good is fear or greed. In reality, morality existed long before many of these religions. Even primates like chimpanzees show cooperation, empathy, and a sense of fairness. Secular societies today, such as Scandinavian countries, have some of the lowest crime rates while being among the least religious. They prove that human beings can live ethically without threats of hell or bribes of heaven. The claim that morality requires the afterlife is not only absurd, but disproven by real life. And finally, the last claim I will cover in this first half is the idea that near-death experiences are proof of an afterlife. People often describe seeing tunnels of light, hearing voices, or floating above their bodies. But science has explained these experiences as brain activity during trauma. Lack of oxygen, chemical releases, and neurological patterns create hallucinations that feel real. The fact that different cultures report visions that match their religious background shows they are not universal truths, but brain-generated stories. A Christian might see Jesus, a Hindu might see Yama, and a Buddhist might see a peaceful light. If these were real glimpses of the afterlife, they should all report the same thing. Instead, What we see is the mind reflecting its cultural expectations during stress. So far, we have looked at several absurd claims about the afterlife, but the rabbit hole goes even deeper. When we start connecting these claims to real history and human psychology, the picture becomes clearer. The afterlife was not revealed by divine truth. It was invented by people who feared death, wanted comfort, or wanted to control others. And when you strip away the holy language, the absurdity becomes obvious. One of the strangest contradictions in afterlife beliefs is the way time works. Many religions claim that souls of the dead wait until Judgment Day, but what exactly are they doing in the meantime? If you die today and the judgment is thousands of years in the future, where do you wait? Some theologies try to solve this by saying souls go to a waiting room called purgatory or barzakh. Others say time works differently in the spiritual realm. But all of these are just patchwork answers to cover up the logical hole. If the afterlife is supposed to bring justice quickly, then why the unnecessary delay? If justice is delayed for thousands of years, it is no justice at all. Imagine telling a victim of murder that their murderer will be punished, but only after the sun burns out. It exposes the claim as a way to avoid accountability in this life. Another absurd idea is that heaven is eternal worship. In Christianity, the book of Revelation describes angels singing "Holy, holy, holy" forever. Preachers often say heaven will be eternal praise and singing, but think about how humans actually function. Even the most passionate fan of music would go insane if forced to sing the same chorus endlessly. Worship is meaningful only if it is occasional. If it becomes permanent, it loses all value. Eternity of worship is not a reward. It is a nightmare disguised as devotion. It reveals that these promises were written by people who could not imagine fulfillment without slavery to a god figure. There is also the strange idea that martyrs or special believers get VIP treatment in the afterlife. In some versions of Islam, martyrs skip judgment and go directly to paradise. In Christianity, saints are given crowns and thrones. In Hindu traditions, gurus and enlightened masters get liberation, while others keep reincarnating. This is absurd because it creates inequality in eternity. Imagine heaven where some people are treated like royalty while others are ordinary citizens. The very concept of paradise should be free of hierarchy. But these claims show how human social structures of class, privilege, and favoritism were simply copied into the imaginary world of the afterlife. If anything, it shows the fingerprints of human imagination, not divine design. One more bizarre aspect is the description of hell as eternal fire. Fire is a physical phenomenon. It requires oxygen and fuel. So how does a fire burn forever in a spiritual realm where physical laws supposedly do not exist? Nobody asks this because religion teaches people not to question. But when you do ask, it becomes clear that hellfire was simply invented by people in the ancient world who knew fire as the worst form of torture. They projected it into eternity. Similarly, descriptions of worms, boiling water, and chains show the imagination of pre-scientific societies, not cosmic truth. It is like taking the torture devices of the ancient world and turning them into eternal scenery. Another absurdity is the idea that heaven or hell depends on belief instead of evidence. Imagine a teacher giving an exam but refusing to show the students the questions. Then, after they fail, the teacher punishes them forever. That is how religions describe God's system. Believe blindly in something you cannot see or prove, and you get rewarded. Doubt it, and you get punished. This is not justice. It is authoritarianism. In real life, if a politician or leader demanded loyalty without evidence, we would call them a dictator. Yet when a god is described doing the same, people call it holy. Some religions even describe physical pleasures in the afterlife that are impossible to sustain. For example, Islamic texts describe men in paradise with endless sexual capacity and eternal virgins. But anyone who has lived real life knows that desire is not endless. Human pleasure is designed for cycles, not infinity. The body and mind both crave variety and rest. If these descriptions were true, they would actually turn into torture over eternity. Imagine eating your favorite food non-stop forever. After a week, you would hate it. After 1,000 years, it would be unbearable. That is the problem with trying to extend human pleasures infinitely. They stop being pleasures. They become absurd. There is also the claim that souls remain conscious after death. But consciousness is tied to the brain. All our experiences of thought, memory, love, fear, and selfhood come from neurons firing. When the brain is damaged, personality changes. Alzheimer's disease can erase a person's identity. If the soul exists independently of the brain, why does brain damage affect who you are? The reality is that once the brain stops, the person stops. To believe otherwise is like thinking a television program keeps playing after you unplug the TV. The signal is not separate from the machine. The machine creates it. Consciousness is not floating energy. It is biology. That makes the claim of eternal conscious souls absurd. Another absurd idea is that children or babies who die go to a special paradise. On the surface, this seems comforting, but it creates serious contradictions. If heaven is guaranteed for babies, then why not end all pregnancies early to make sure every child goes to paradise? Religions never address this because it would expose the absurdity of their system. Instead, they create loopholes like an age of accountability. But this again shows that these afterlife claims are human inventions, trying to plug logical holes after the fact. Let us not forget the idea of resurrection of the body in its perfect form. Many Christians believe they will rise with perfect, youthful bodies. But what age is perfect? Do people who died at 90 come back as 25? Do children who died at 5 also come back as 25? And what about people with disabilities? Are they given new bodies? If so, does that mean their earthly form was inferior? If God created them with disabilities, why erase them in heaven? The contradictions show how heaven is just a projection of human vanity, not a consistent system. Another absurd afterlife claim is the ranking of sins. In some religions, you can be eternally punished for small infractions. Eating pork, missing prayers, or doubting God are considered worse than murder in some texts. That is absurd, because morality should be measured by harm. A God who punishes curiosity or diet choices more harshly than violence is not just. It reflects human power structures where obedience was more important than kindness. Afterlife claims often reveal more about ancient rulers than about divine truth. Then there is the bizarre belief that heaven and hell are physical places located in the universe. Medieval Christians thought heaven was above the sky and hell was underground. Muslims in some traditions imagined the heavens as multiple layers above the earth. But science has shown no such places exist. We have sent telescopes and probes into space. We have drilled deep into the earth. There are no golden cities above the clouds and no lakes of fire below. These ideas were based on primitive geography, not reality. Yet billions still speak about them as though they are real. Perhaps the most absurd claim of all is that death is not the end. People fear death because it feels like annihilation. Religions exploit this fear by promising continuation. But every shred of evidence from biology, neuroscience, and physics tells us that when the body ends, so does the person. We do not see ghosts communicating reliable information. We do not see souls leaving bodies. What we see is silence. The afterlife is a comforting story written by people who could not accept the finality of death. But sometimes truth is harder than fantasy. Accepting death as the end forces us to value the life we actually have. It makes every moment precious because it will not repeat. If we step back, all these claims share one thing in common. They reflect human imagination trapped by human limits. Ancient people could not imagine justice without eternal punishment. They could not imagine happiness without endless pleasures. They could not imagine existence without bodies, so they extended human ideas into eternity. That is why the afterlife looks suspiciously like life on Earth, only stretched out, exaggerated, and stripped of logic. Gold cities, gardens, torture chambers, sexual fantasies, and cosmic courts are not signs of divine revelation. They are signs of human storytelling. The real tragedy is how much damage these absurd claims about the afterlife cause. Wars have been fought by people promised paradise for dying in battle. Innocent children are traumatized with threats of hell. Billions waste the only life they have preparing for a life they will never get. People give money, time, and obedience to religious authorities who dangle heaven as a reward and threaten hell as punishment. The absurdity is not just funny, it is tragic. The truth is that we do not know what happens after death, but ignorance does not give us the right to invent fairy tales and call them facts. The honest answer is that the afterlife claims made by religions are absurd. They fail logic, they fail evidence, and they fail morality. And once we see through them, we can start focusing on this life, because this life is real. This life is precious, and this life is the only one we know we have.